happening, gang? Back live in the secret stash, hanging out with my man, Engineer Steve, by the way. Engineer Steve, always keeping it fun in the stash. Appreciate you, brother. Nice little fun theme song to roll into. And appreciate you guys for hanging out with us here. Real Talk Radio San Diego every Tuesday between 10 and 11 a.m., leaving you a little better than how we found you. I'm hanging out with my man Joel Incorvaia of Incorvaia and Associates. You can check him out, by the way, at Incor Law. That's INCOR law.com. Or you can call him at 858-259-2220 for, I would say, all of your league. And we just learned, actually, in the break that Joel was even on Jerry Springer. Hey, now you're going to have to tell the fans that quick story.
Well, in the early 1990s, I worked on an adoption case that got quite a bit of publicity in San Diego, and I got a call from the Jerry Springer Show, and he had just started his national program. He wasn't even in San Diego, and he said, "Yeah, we want to do a show about adoptions. We'd really like to hear your perspective about the case you handled." So they flew me back to Chicago.
Oh, wow.
And I was on the show, but and I represented the people that adopted the baby.
Okay.
And of course, the name of the show was "They Stole My Baby." So basically, I was the bad guy, and my client was the bad guy. I didn't know that at the time, but it was kind of an interesting experience.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
And then you immediately followed with a defamation of character suit.
Right.
Yeah. No, good stuff. Now, obviously, that's not the theme of getting Joel in studio today. We're talking about all the stuff. I'm going to use that word nicely. Stuff that tends to go wrong in the throes of a residential real estate transaction. We started off the top of the show, Joel, talking about sellers, their need to over-disclose at any turn or corner. Another question I get quite a bit is, once a seller's filling out their stuff, they'll be like, "Hey, do I need to?" If you're asking if you need to, ... the answer is always yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the only way that you're going to be able to protect your behind in the event that something goes wrong. But let's shift gears over. We talked about the buyer. We talked about the home inspector, how important of a role that is to make sure you're getting a good home inspector. And then also, having backups, having some other people that can corroborate the story of the home inspector, make sure they're not missing anything that could potentially be a big item that could make you not want to buy the house, like cracked slab. You'd mentioned that, right? Sure, they told you the window's busted, but then they didn't tell you the thing's falling off the side of a cliff.
Right.
What about if they're going to buy a condo? This is a very common transaction in San Diego County. Medium density. I mean, that's the highest growing. Mike, if you go down to Bankers Hill right now, you see all the projects they got going on down there? It's insane how many doors are going to be coming live in the next 2 to 3 years, right down in Bankers Hill alone. And there's a lot of liability that goes on with those. So what's the number one thing a buyer's got to watch out for if they're buying a condo?
Well, if you're buying a used condominium, a resale, what you really want to make sure is that you know the entire litigation history that the Homeowners Association has had with the builder of the project, because San Diego at one time was known as the construction defect capital of the world. That is, there were more construction defect lawsuits in San Diego County than any other county in California, and maybe the entire nation, and probably about 60% of those related to condominiums. The Homeowners Association has a fiduciary duty to each of the owners there to make sure that there are problems with the construction of the units, that they are addressed, and it is the homeowner's responsibility, not the homeowners individually, to go after the developer if there are problems. And it just seems like at some point in time, there will be some sort of construction defect issue that will come up with respect to even the best built projects. Now,
curiosity, is that something that is part of the typical paperwork? That, like when a buyer's going through the due diligence, and then they get the homeowner documents, right, from the association. Now, do they just have to report if something is currently being considered for litigation, or of course already in litigation? Do they have to also report things that have happened before that are now done?
Well, the seller, if the seller's aware, should probably disclose, but the HOA is not going to disclose anything to you. They're just going to give you a copy of their bylaws and their CC&Rs. And
they'll tell you if it's currently in litigation.
But let's just say there was a lawsuit 5 years ago that got settled, and sometimes what we find is that the problem didn't get completely addressed or fixed because it turned out the developer didn't have enough money to pay for it or didn't have enough insurance coverage to pay for everything. And so maybe the repairs weren't completed to 100% satisfaction. Later on, the HOA comes back and says, oh, well, we're going to have to do a special assessment against each of the owners. You might have to put up $2,000 or $3,000, $4,000 each to pay for these repairs because we didn't get enough money from the lawsuit. So you want to find out if there has been litigation and what's been done to make those repairs. And of course, you want to find out if there's any pending litigation or any investigations being undertaken to see if there's a basis for litigation. Another thing you got to look at is how old is the project? Because the statute of limitations to sue a developer is 10 years from the date of completion of the project. So if your project is 8 or 9 years old and there hasn't been any litigation against the developer, there actually is now a lot of pressure on the homeowners association to do an investigation to make sure there aren't any problems, because now your clock, so to speak, is your time is running out to bring a lawsuit against the developer. So sometimes they'll be 9 years into the project and you think, oh, we don't really have a problem. And now some of the lawyers that handle these kind of cases, they're writing letters, contacting all the homeowners associations and saying, you need to do an inspection. You need to have investigators go out there to make sure there's no problems, because the clock's ticking. And if you don't do it now, you'll never be able to do it. So if I'm looking to buy a condominium that's maybe 8 or 9 years old, I might be concerned about that. I want to make sure that there's not going to be some other problems that come up before that 10-year statute of limitations expires.
I'm glad that you called the spade, because let's be honest, man. I mean, this is a highly litigious environment that we're in right now, and that is like, I mean, if you want to talk about finding yourself in the crosshairs, a condominium project in the 9th year of its existence, they're just getting bombarded with stuff from local ravens that are coming around and trying to pluck that thing for all it's worth, right?
Right.
Probably even sending out people on their own dime to go do analyses of the place, just because there's a very good chance they're going to find some low-hanging fruit.
Exactly. Another area I'd be concerned about is if you're buying a condominium that was formerly an apartment project. It was converted to condominiums by a developer, because typically apartments aren't built to the same high standards that a condominium might be. Plus, these are older projects.
Right.
That's why they're doing a conversion. So a developer may come in and do a conversion on a project that might be 25, 30 years old, and they do a lot of cosmetic repairs. They'll go in and put in granite countertops, recarpet, paint, and so forth. But basically, any structural problems that have been there for 10 or 15 years are still there. And those projects tend to have more construction defect problems than new construction would have.
And curiosity, I actually don't know this answer. So how does the statute of limitations work for that? Once it's been converted, does that start the 10-year
Exactly.
again? It does.
It's 10
interesting.
years from the date the conversion's completed and you start selling the units.
Wow, so that's a high risk that developer's taking on.
Right. And another thing we discover is a lot of developers, they're getting a little smarter. They're setting up special purpose companies to develop each project. And those companies, once the project's sold and the money's been distributed, they have nothing.
They fold.
They go out of business. They may have limited insurance coverage because their insurance policies may have expired years ago. So you sue them and you think, okay, well, there's a big pocket developer. I'm going to go after him. You find out, well, it was really a shell company they used to do this development. It has no money, has limited insurance, and there's nothing there to pay for the repairs.
Wow.
Something to be concerned about.
That's big time.
Yes.
That's big time. I learned something today. So you're leaving me better than how you found me, Joel. I'm sure that's the case for Stash Nation. So I guess the last question I've got, which is germane to this, almost like, in chronological order, if that's the case as a buyer, I mean, what do you do? So let's say you have great counsel in your corner, or you're lucky enough to have shared a conversation or a space with my man Joel, and he actually prompts you to go and dig out the history and that you find something. Like, are you going to really not buy the property that you love just because it's got some old stuff that could potentially or not come back into term? Like, what's your best advice to do once you've discovered this in your discovery process?
Well, you have to look at how significant the problem is. If, for example, there's been issues with leaking roofs and things like that can cause mold-related damage and dry rot and things like that, I would really consider whether I want to go through the purchase unless I'm absolutely sure the problems have been addressed. Obviously, if you find evidence of a significant crack or subsidence in the slab or the foundation, those are major problems. I mean, those problems generally cost over $100,000 or more to repair. So it depends on how significant the issues are, of course. But sometimes you have to divorce your emotion from the economic reality of what you're doing. And if you think, well, I fell in love with this home, I'm sure I can probably bring my friend in to fix a few of these problems, and then you find out you have a $100,000 problem, you probably aren't going to be in love with that home a year later.
Yeah.
So sometimes you have to have some other people give you solid advice and say, well, maybe this isn't the perfect home for you. Maybe it seemed like the home you were in love with, but maybe you should be looking for another property that doesn't have this kind of potential problem.
And final follow-up to this is, so let's say the seller doesn't disclose it, okay? They had no knowledge of it, or maybe it happened before it was ever under their watch as an owner. The HOA didn't include it in their original documentation because maybe it wasn't an active thing. Like you said, it was done and closed and 5, 6, 7 years ago. How do you even get access to that information?
Well, you have to probably contact the HOA during the inspection process. You usually have 15 days to do your inspections and decide if you want to buy the property and see if they'll give that information to you. Talk to real estate agents that maybe know that particular project. There's usually agents who've probably sold a lot of units in that project. So maybe have your agent talk to other people in the area to see if there's been a history. You can go into the court system. You can actually go to the database for the San Diego Superior Court, and you could basically put names in and see if there's been any litigation involving this particular project. So there's lots of ways to do due diligence and discover if there has been a history of problems with a condominium or even a house that you're purchasing.
So that would be, if you go to the database, you'd pull it up by address?
Well, with the Superior Court, you put the name in. So if you're buying, let's say...
The name of the complex?
La Jolla Village Homeowners Association, just a name. You look to see if they've been a plaintiff in any litigation. You can go back 25 years, I think, just in the court database, and you can get all kinds of interesting information for free. Just go online.
That's awesome. My man, see, what I tell you, Adrian, you get a man of the caliber of Joel Incorvaia in the house, and people start getting smarter up around here. By the way, Joel, in case someone wants to have an opportunity to talk to you directly about this or any other thing that may be coming up for them, they probably want to go down to your website first, right? That's Incorlaw.
You could check out our website. It has a lot of information about our law firm and our history and the kind of work we do. And just give me a call. One thing we pride ourselves on is that we always try to return any phone call within 24 hours. So if you're a new client and you want to have a consultation, we'd be glad to talk to you on the phone and see if there's something we can do to help you. We don't charge you for that. And if it looks like it's something that would be a good fit for you and us, then we'll set up a meeting and go from there.
And that number, by the way, is 858-259-2220. I'll give that number one more time. It's 858-259-2220. So, Joel, coming up, I guess we'll do, I'd like to do a little summary of some of these insights if possible, and then I'll ask you for some final thoughts, and then we'll share Joel's best advice for a seller and buyer moving through the process right when we come back. Real Talk Radio, San Diego, Secret Stash. We'll be right back.